Whew. Good morning. This is Sunday, June 30th, 2024. I remember that because my mom's birthday was yesterday, and she and I sang a happy birthday song together like we annually do. It's on my Facebook page if you want to check it out. Um, my name is Douglas Griffin. We are in the book of Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Yeah. Okay, we have one more book for the Pentateuch. The five, Penta just means five, right? Um, where God is chronicling the children of Israel coming into Egypt. They're there for a couple hundred years. Then the Exodus, them going out of Egypt, and then in the book of Leviticus, he's teaching them or just retraining them on how to worship him because for 200 years they've been worshiping Egyptian gods. I know it doesn't say that in the movies when we watch the Ten Commandments. They seem to be very faithful and pious, but God, all throughout the scripture, accuses them of worshiping Egyptian gods. Um, and so he has to retrain them because none of them have a personal relationship with God. Abraham did, Isaac did, Jacob did, but the kids did not. The kids grew up in Egypt. They're Egyptians. So in the book of Numbers, he's now saying, now I'm going to take you back to the land of Canaan. It will be renamed Israel. And we will get back on track as far as creating a nation that is wholly sold out to me that I can use as an example for other nations. So they can see that you're the only ones who serve the true God. They'll see in how you win battles and the miracles that I do that all their gods are false and that you're serving the true God. And then they will choose because God doesn't make us do anything. He always gives us the opportunity to choose to do something. And he shows you great reasons why. The devil gets in your brain and says, but God's always showing you, here are wonderful reasons why you should do this. And so I'm going to use you, Israel, as my example. So in the book of Numbers, they are headed back to Israel. But as we know, Canaan, Israel, they don't make it. So we're going to find out why they didn't make it. And of course, you already know. All right, Numbers chapter 12. Um, verse 1, it says, Then Miriam and Aaron spoke. Now, I want to say that it's unusual to put, okay, first of all, who are Miriam and Aaron? Miriam and Aaron are Moses' older brother and sister. Miriam and Aaron grew up together. Moses grew up in the house of Pharaoh. So for 40 years, while Miriam and Aaron are growing up, they have no contact with Moses because he's in the house of Pharaoh. Zero contact with him. Other than the first 1 or 2 years of his life when he was a baby, Moses' mother babysat her own son, but never let on that that was her son. But other than 1 or 2 baby years, he grew up away from them. So Miriam and Aaron are quite close. They're not that close to Moses because at the age of 40, Moses takes it upon himself to free all of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. And I guess he's going to do it just singly, just go by and kill all the Egyptians one by one. He murders an Egyptian, buries him in the sand. God reveals that to a fellow Israelite, and Moses is embarrassed and he flees. And for 40 years, he's in the wilderness. So this is now 80 years that he has no contact with Miriam and Aaron. For 80 years, they don't know him. They're best friends, Miriam and Aaron. Miriam's the oldest, then Aaron. And then, like 4 years later, Moses is born. But they don't know Moses. They don't know Moses. He shows up. Let my now they know they're related to him, but they don't know him. And he's very Midianitish in his ways because he spent 40 years out in the wilderness with the Midianites. He got married to Zipporah, had kids, but again, Miriam and Aaron do not know Moses. For 80 years, they have spent no time with him other than the first year of his life. He comes back and he's giving orders and let my people go and let's go. And he got together with his brother Aaron, and Aaron was used as a mouthpiece because Moses, having spent all that time by himself out in the wilderness, not talking to anybody, he doesn't like to talk to people. And yet God gives him this task of having to lead the children of Israel. And he said, well, they don't know me. They're not going to like me. And that's very true. They don't know him. He had spent zero time, first 80 years of his life, he didn't spend any time with them. Either he was in the house of Pharaoh, he was out in the wilderness. So, but Aaron grew up with all of them. So Aaron volunteers, I'll speak to them. You speak to Pharaoh, Moses, but I'll speak to the children of Israel. So Moses has zero confidence in himself in front of the children of Israel. So he shows up, let my people go. Now they're out in the wilderness. This is this is year 81 of Moses' life. But again, 80 of it away from Miriam and Aaron. They don't know him. It's unusual to put the woman's name first in Jewish literature. They put Miriam's name first. They normally, even though she's the oldest, they don't put the woman's name first. That's just their choice. It's not like God told them, do not put the woman's name first. There's a lot of things that the Jews did in their tradition. That was just their tradition. It doesn't mean God told them to do it that way. So we don't have to look at it and say, women must never come first. That was just their tradition. There's no scripture that says that. So when you see a woman's name first, it's because she was the one who was pushing the event that's about to happen. If you see the woman's name first, whoever's name you see first usually is the person who was in charge, who was pushing it. So Miriam, it says Miriam and Aaron spoke. The word spoke is in the feminine gender, meaning it was Miriam. Aaron was just standing there going, what she said. It was Miriam. So it says they spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman. Now, literally, it's the Cushite woman. Cush was a land south of Egypt. We know it as Ethiopia. So the translators just translated Ethiopian woman, but it says Cushite woman, but we know it as Ethiopian. And so in order to help us understand what they're talking about, they took those liberties sometimes. So it's a land south of Egypt, and there were some Cushites, some Ethiopians who were in Egypt when Moses showed up to say, let my people go. And we know there was a mixed multitude that traveled with the Israelites, the children of Israel, out of Egypt to head back to Israel. So it says Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian or Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. He said he's saying it twice, so there's no confusion. Are you talking about Zipporah, his first wife? No, he'd married an Ethiopian woman. I'm going to say it twice, so you don't think I'm talking about his first wife. They're not speaking against his first wife, Zipporah, who was a Midianite, who Moses met between the ages of 40 and 80 when he was in the wilderness, and he rescued Zipporah and her sisters and got to know them, and they're Midianites. Midian, okay, here's Abraham. So Abraham has Isaac through his first wife, Sarah. She passes away, and Abraham marries another woman named Keturah. And he's had 6 kids through her. So now he's just having kids. For 100 years, he had no kids, and now suddenly he's having kids. So 6 kids through Zipporah. One of them was named Midian. And the Midianites lived on the other side of the Jordan. And so when Moses left Egypt, because, oh no, they think I'm a murderer. Well, he was a murderer. That he went up, he didn't go back to Israel. He went through Saudi Arabia and up to the Jordan and Lebanon area, that area. So he had married a Midianite woman named Zipporah. Apparently she was dead now. And I can guess as to when that happened. again, this is just a decision of the Israel and most cultures. I don't mean to pick on Israel at 1,000 years before Christ, because most cultures were like this. Um, Often, when women died, they don't mention it. They only mention it when in their mind, the important men died. So somewhere she died, and I think I know where. And now he's married an Ethiopian woman who had been traveling with him. Okay, so Miriam, Aaron is there, but it's Miriam pushing it, is upset. Now, what is she upset about? That's really interesting. She's just criticizing him, spoke against, would literally be translated, just criticized Moses. How dare you marry an Ethiopian woman? Is she upset because she's Ethiopian? Because she's black? Because she's not? It, so I think there's some hints there. But let's go back. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 19, it says, Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, this is at age 80. He'd been in Midian for 40 years as a shepherd, minding his business. Then God set a bush on fire and said, Okay, you've had enough break, now back. God will do that in your life. He'll just wake you up with some thing happens and suddenly, Hi, I'm setting this bush on fire to get your attention. God needs to get our attention sometimes. So sets the bush on fire, talks Moses out of the bush. And Moses has not been thinking about God for 40 years. Doesn't mean God hasn't been thinking about him, though, right? So you can just put God out of your mind. God's still thinking about you. He's thinking about how he's going to get you back. I don't mean get you back as punishment. I mean get you back in, in line with what you're supposed to be doing. So he says to him in Exodus 4:19, Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, Go return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. Because 40 years earlier, he had killed someone. He had killed an Egyptian, and that Pharaoh found out because God uncovered, Moses buried that Egyptian, but God let the winds blow and uncover the Egyptian, and everybody knew what Moses has done. Uh, because God will uncover your Egyptians. You're trying to bury something. Oh, nobody's going to know about this. God will uncover it so that you have to deal with it. Okay. So Moses fled because they were going to punish him. They're going to kill him because he killed an Egyptian. Well, that Pharaoh's dead now. There's a new Pharaoh who knows nothing about it, doesn't care anything about it. So he says, You can go back. The men who sought your life are dead. Verse 20 of Exodus 4 said, Then Moses took his wife and his sons, that's Zipporah and his sons, and he set them on a donkey and says, You go back to Midian because I am going down to Egypt. So you go live with your father in law, my father in law. Go live with your dad, Zipporah. I'm going down to Egypt. So he set them on a donkey and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand, and it became the rod of God because Moses had to let go of this rod that he'd been trusting in for 40 years, and and God said, "That's mine now. I'm going to use it." So you have to let go of ownership of it, and there are things that we've been holding on and trusting that sometimes God makes us let go of because He wants us to only trust in Him, right? So, Exodus chapter 18. This is when he's already gone to to Egypt, said, Let my people go. And he's led them out, and they've gone on this circuitous route. Instead of going straight up to Israel, they've gone east, and they're going in through Saudi Arabia, and they're going to come in that way. So it says, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, this is Exodus 18:5, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. So now that he was back, his father-in-law brings his wife and his sons to meet him, right? So we know she was alive then. Now, in the book of Numbers, Jethro leaves Moses. Also, who came along was Moses' wife's brother, Hobab. Because in Numbers chapter 10, we just read this 2 weeks ago, it says, Now Moses said to Hobab, the son of Ruel, the Midianite. Now, Ruel is also Jethro. So is it his Hebrew name, his Midianite name, his Greek name. So some characters in the Bible will just have different names depending on where they are in the world and what that person calls him. So now Moses said to Hobab, the son of Ruel, but that's Jethro, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. It says it's Moses' father-in-law, so he didn't have 5 different father-in-laws. He says, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. So now they're about to leave. They've gone to Mount Sinai. They've gotten the 10 Commandments. They've gotten instructions. They've built the tabernacle so they can relearn how to worship God. So now we're about to go back to Israel. Book of Leviticus is over. Now we're in the book of Numbers, which means we got to go. We got to count up the numbers of people. We're counting them all up. Okay, now all these numbers of people, we're going to go. So he says, so to Hobab, why don't you go with us? So we're setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well, for the Lord has promised good things to Israel. So he's having to try to talk him into coming with us. And I think it's because the reason he was there was his sister-in-law, his sister had married Moses. But his dad, Jethro, left. And I think that Moses' wife, I think his Hobab's sister, has now passed. And so there's no reason for him to stay anymore. I was here because of my sister, but she's passed. So I'm going to leave. And Moses is saying, no, even though, and they don't say this, but like, even though your sister passed, my wife passed, why don't you still go with us? You can still go with us. And he eventually talks Hobab into going with him. Okay. But I think he has to talk him into it because some event has happened where he thinks, well, I can leave now. That's Numbers chapter 10. We know by Numbers chapter 12, he's married somebody else. So somewhere in there, Zipporah passed. And so I think that's where. In Judges chapter 4, verse 11, and the book of Judges happens as soon as they get back in Israel. Well, then we have the book of Joshua. But shortly after they get back to Israel, then we have the book of Joshua, book of Judges. So this is maybe 100 years later. Nah, not even 100 years. 50 years later, you have the book of Judges. It says, now Heber the Kenite of the children of Hobab. So the Midianites also call themselves Kenites. And so we know that Hobab went with him and his children are there with them. It says, now Heber, the Kenite of the children of Hobab, it says the father-in-law of Moses. They're saying Hobab is the father-in-law of Moses. Hobab is not the father-in-law of Moses. He's the brother-in-law of Moses. So why is this mistranslation? Because the word for father and the word for brother are the same word. The word for father and son, the same word. The word for son and grandson, it's the same word. It just means the relative of. He's my relative. Hey, cousin, you might say to your nephew. You might say to your cousin. You might say to your first cousin, your second cousin, your third cousin, hey, cousin. It's just a word that's kind of used that way. So the way they translate it depends on their understanding of the context. They have to read all the scriptures before and after to go, should I translate this brother or should I translate this son? Should I translate this father or should I translate this grand? Because it's only one word, it's the same word. So here they translated the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses. But we know Hobab is not his father-in-law. His father-in-law was named Jethro. This is the son. So they mistranslated it here. And I'm bringing this up for a reason. But he had separated himself from the Kenites and pinched his tent near the terebinth tree at Zaanim, which is beside Kadesh. And so Hobab went with him and his kids went with him, but they're starting to separate themselves during the book of Judges and eke out their own place. Because when they got to the land of Israel, the Israelites themselves, the children of Zebulun and Issachar and Judah and Levite and Reuben and Simeon and Asher and Dan and Naphtali and Donder and Blitzen and okay, anyway, they all, I'm making that up, there's no Donder and Blitzen. Okay, they divided up the land. And so the people who had come extra had to kind of find their own place, fit in the crevices. So now they're separate. Hobab's there with his kids. Hobab has passed by now because it's 50, 60 years later, but his kids are there, and so they're trying to find their own land. All right. Now, I need to back up because I'm just fascinated. What was Miriam upset about? That the Ethiopian woman had a different religion or was of a different race? People have used certain scriptures in the Bible to say, look, the Bible teaches that you should not marry people from other races. They use that for years here in America, Christians. But does it teach that? Is that what the Bible teaches? I know you guys don't think that, but okay. Anyway, so I need to back up um, because just look at a hint of what she might have been upset about. In Genesis chapter 9, so we're going to go back to Noah. And Noah had three kids. Shem, from which the Israelites come from. Ham, from which the Canaanites come from. And they're going back to the land of Canaan. The children of Shem are going back to the land that belongs to the children of Canaan. And Japheth's group mostly went to Europe. So for those of you who were here 4 years ago, I taught extensively on the nation groups and how they split up. And okay, so it says Noah began to be a farmer, Genesis chapter 9, verse 20. And he planted a vineyard, and then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. So after Noah lands, the ark finally lands. They've been in the ark 40 days. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but they were in the ark much longer than that, waiting for the rain to drain out of the bathtub. So then they finally landed. Noah's like, I need to get drunk. Bless his heart. That wasn't the right thing to do, but the Bible just tells the truth about everybody. Just because the Bible reports it doesn't mean we're supposed to do it. So the difference between scriptures that are descriptive of what happened and scriptures that are prescriptive, like a doctor writes you a prescription to say, here, follow this prescription. So some scriptures tell us, follow this and do this, and some scriptures simply describe what happened, but we're not supposed to do it. So you have to know which scripture is descriptive and which scriptures are prescriptive. So this is a description of what happened. So he gets drunk. Verse 22, it says, Ham, the father of Canaan. And it tells you that it mentions Canaan. Ham had 4 sons, but he mentions Canaan here because Canaan is the star of what's about to happen next. So Noah has 3 sons. Noah's drunk. He's passed out. He has 3 sons. Ham, and it says the father of Canaan, because this scripture is going to be about Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside the tent. Said, uh-oh, dad's naked and drunk and passed out in the tent. We got to cover him up. So they walk in. So the other 2 sons walk in backwards, Shem and Japheth, and they cover up their father's nakedness and they walk out. Ham apparently told his son Canaan about it. Guess what I saw? Your grandfather was drunk and naked. How Canaan reacted to that is what the next scriptures are about. Because that's why it mentions him. Ham, the father of Canaan. It mentions him because you want to know that's who the next scriptures are about. 24. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Now again, the word son can be translated brother, father, grandson. In fact, it says younger son, and it's not talking about Ham because Ham is not the youngest. Ham is, in fact, the oldest. So it says your younger son, can't be talking about Ham. Ham's not the younger son. It specifically says younger relative, and it should just, because he wants to know this is his grandkid. Knew what his younger grandkid, but again, they translated it son because they don't know how to understand context. So when he knew what his younger son, his grandson, had done to him, then he said, "Cursed be Canaan." So he said, "Cursed be Canaan," because Canaan had done it. I hear the most unusual teachings on this. He says, "Cursed be Canaan," because Canaan did it. Ham has 4 sons. If he was cursing Ham and his descendants, they'd all be cursed. But he's cursing Canaan because Canaan's the one who did it. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren, because Canaan did some crazy thing to Noah. Canaan has a problem. And and Canaan inherits the land of Canaan. When Moses' children begin to have children and they began to split up because they're repopulating the earth, these are the only 8 people on earth at the time, or at least in this whole region. Because we still don't know if the entire earth flooded or if simply this huge region of earth flooded. But anyway, these are only 8 people that the Bible talks about. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, 8 people. They split up. Again, Japheth, the youngest son, goes toward Europe. Ham, the oldest son, his descendants go south and a little bit east. Shem, his people also go east, um, and some north, and this is just how this all works out. So in Genesis chapter 10, verse 6, and again, I'm just investigating Miriam, what she was upset about. Genesis chapter 10, verse 6 says, the sons of Ham were Cush. Remember, Moses married a Cushite woman? So, an Ethiopian woman. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, which is another name for Egypt. So his sons were Cush and Egypt. He could have said his sons were Ethiopia and Egypt. Put, excuse me, um, and Canaan. And I forget the area that Put, I think that's Nigeria. So Cush, Mizraim, and Put all went south. Mizraim, who's Egypt, founded the country of Egypt. Cush founded Ethiopia, and Put founded Nigeria as well as some other countries. And Canaan, who stayed right there, their people stayed where they were. Cush begat Nimrod. So out of the children of Ham, the most powerful kingdoms were formed. Some of the most powerful kingdoms were formed out of the son of Ham, the sons of Ham. Not Canaan. Canaan, when his children who stayed in the land that later became Israel, all those people, his children, his descendants, did not build mighty nations, but the other sons did. Cush begat Nimrod. We know who Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty name on one of the earth. We know that Nimrod built the Tower of Babel. Nimrod founded Babylon, which later became Iraq, modern day Iraq. And Babylon was one of the great kingdoms that existed in antiquity. Verse 10 of Genesis 10 says, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Iraq. Erech, Akkad, Chaldea in the land of Shinar, and we discussed all that. They went east as far as China. But again, I spent like 2 weeks on this. From that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh. Nineveh was one of the great kingdoms. Rehoboth, Kalach. In verse 13, it says, Mizraim or Egypt begat Ludum, Ananim, Lachebim, Nephthalim, Pathrim, Calcium, from whom came the Philistines. So the Philistines came from Ham, his people. The Jews came, and the Arabs, today we call them Arabs, came from Shem. The Philistines are not Arab. Even though they came back to the land of Israel and kept fighting with them, they're not Arab. The Palestinians today are not descendants of the Philistines. Palestinians today are Arab, and they're descendants of Shem. They're cousins of Israelites. The war that's going on in Gaza is happening between cousins. But the Hamites are totally different people. Now, Canaan, in verse 15, Canaan, though, so he traces the 4 sons of Ham. Canaan begot Sidon, and Jesus talks about the land of Tyre and Sidon and how they were judged, his firstborn. Now, listen to who came from Canaan. The Jebusites, verse 16, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, all the ites that live in Canaan, obviously, Canaan's their father, and he had these kids. When Israel comes back into, when the children of Israel come back to the land of Canaan, that's later named Israel, he has to fight all of these Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, because they still live there. They all came from Canaan, and they are all cursed by God. It says, verse 19 says, the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza. They founded Gaza, where the fighting's going on today. They inhabit the land of Canaan, which later be called Israel, and Israel's greatest enemies are all descended from Canaan. Then you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah. These are all descendants of Canaan. They founded Sodom, they founded Gomorrah, and Adamah and Zeboim as far as Lasha. So places that God has eventually destroys. The descendants of Canaan were summarily all destroyed. All these other nations still exist, but because of Canaan and what they learned from their ancestor Canaan, they were the most corrupt as far as God was concerned, as far as worshiping idols and having all sorts of phenomenal sin. And whatever Canaan did to Noah, he passed on to his kids, and God has cursed Canaan, and all of his descendants who live in the land of Canaan later became Israel. But not the other kids of Ham, not the Cushites. Canaan was a son, Cush was a son. So if you're from Cush, so Miriam being mad because you married a Cushite, it's not because the curse was on them. Because Ham's other kids were not cursed. Only Canaan was cursed. If you're from Cush, which is Ethiopia, there's no curse on you. If you're from Egypt, there's no curse on you. In fact, those kingdoms became some of the greatest kingdoms ever. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1, it says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, talking to the Israelites, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Now, all of these actually are Canaanites. Some of them maintain Canaan's name, their grandfather, their great-grandfather's name, but they all are his children. They're all his kids. They just some took their own names, but they're all Canaanites. They're all still living in Israel, and they're all cursed. And so God's saying you're going to have to kick all of them out. He says, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. When you come in contact with them, verse 2 of Deuteronomy 7, and when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, because they are the worst. You are susceptible, you Israelites, to following other gods. So I can't even let you near them, because they're the absolute worst as far as being anti-God. And they're going to pull you into their sins and make you anti-God. It says, nor shall you make marriages with them. But he's talking about the children of Canaan, not the children of Cush. Cush is Canaan's brother. So I don't know why Miriam is mad about you married a Cushite, an Ethiopian woman, because there's no curse on them. God said, do not marry any children of Canaan. He says, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughters for your son. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, break down their sacred pillars, cut down their wooden images, burn their carved images with fire, because they're the worst. It says, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a separate treasure above all peoples on the face of the earth. He's not saying you can't marry anybody else. You can't marry these specific cursed people of Canaan, because that entire line is cursed, because they are the most corrupt as far as worshiping other gods and all this type of sins they get into. In Exodus chapter 34, verse 15, again, he's reminding them, lest you make a covenant with inhabitants of the land that I'm sending you back to, because I'm sending you back to the land of Canaan, which we're going to eventually call Israel, and they play the harlot with their gods and make sacrifice to their gods. And one of them invites you, and you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters play the harlot with their gods. And we know what that means. That's Kadesh. His daughters play the harlot with their gods. Like, I am a temple prostitute. come and have sex with me, and that's how you get close to God. He says, and they make your sons play harlot with their gods. They'll turn your sons into harlots too. We talked about the male prostitutes in the temple. You want to get close to God? Come have sex with me, and then you'll be close to God. And that's how they were in Canaan. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 21, just to be clear, he says, when you go out, verse 10, when you go out to war against your enemies, and he's talking about when you're on the way to Canaan. You're not there yet because you're going up through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, through Lebanon. You're going to cross over. You're going to run into other peoples, Midianites, Moabites, other people. You're going to run into them. They don't have the same curse on them. So when you go out to war against your enemies on your way to Canaan, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and desire her, and would take her for your wife. Well, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails, and she shall put off the clothes of her captivity. She's no longer a captive. She's going to, and that, again, shaving her head and trimming it was just a symbol of I'm now purifying myself. It's like baptism. It's just symbolically, I'm letting go of my old life and my old gods and everything, and I'm shaving and I'm clean now, and I am symbolically marrying into this new tribe. She shall put off the clothes of her captivity and remain in your house. Mourn her father and her mother a full month, like, oh, because I'm letting them go because they believe the old stuff, but I'm now accepting this new religion. And after that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. So you can marry any of these other enemies that you run into, Moabites, Midianites, anybody else, but just no one in the land of Canaan because they are all cursed. Canaan and his descendants, not the Cushites, his brother, not Mizraim, not the Egyptians, his other brother, not the Nigerians, Canaan's other brother. You can marry any of them. You just cannot marry a Canaanite. So, what is Miriam upset about? It's not his nationality. It's not the fact that, well, she's from Cush and you're not supposed to marry them because you can marry anybody else. So they say in verse 2, to Moses, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And she's right. Miriam prophesied. Aaron got up and spoke to the people and directed them. In fact, because Moses was afraid to talk to people. Moses was always stressed out. He says, and the Lord heard it, though. Now, the Lord hears everything. So when they say the Lord heard, it's not like the Lord was just reading the magazine and went, what they say over there? He's always listening, but they mean the Lord heard it in a way that he's going to now respond to it. And you could have a parent or somebody who hears the whole conversation, but finally says, okay, that's it. My grandmother used to watch, not my grandmother, my wife's grandmother would watch the little girls play out in the backyard, and they would be having fun, and she's watching them, and then they would say, oh, let's pretend like we're at church, and they'd be the choir, and somebody might preach, and then they would do communion, because, they went to church every week, and then they would say, hey, now we've got this wine out for communion, let's turn it into a bar, because they didn't know any better. They were girls. And that's when the grandmother would come out and say, okay, time's up. You've run out now. Turning this just like them deacons at the church. Now you're talking about a bar. But she had heard the rest of it. So it's not like she hadn't heard it all. But now when she heard something that she wasn't going to put up with anymore, she'd come out and say, okay, you're not going to turn the communion into a bar on the back porch. So God's hearing Moses, Miriam, and all of them talk. He hears everything. But it says, now the Lord heard it. He's showing up like, okay, now you've gone too far. Now, verse 3 says, now the man Moses was very humble, more than all the men who are on the face of the earth. And that just means, and it's interesting because Moses wrote this. But he must not have been very humble if he wrote it. He's saying he didn't like to defend himself. He didn't. Moses, as soon as the people would attack Moses would go to God and, oh, kill me now. He wasn't equipped to defend himself. Some people just aren't that way. Some people are really good at defending themselves, and some people, they just don't have it in him. So he just never defended himself. He would just go run to God and complain. So God shows up. I'm going to defend you. Verse 4, suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. So this cloud appears, and they hear a voice come from the cloud. Hey, you three, let me holler at you for a minute. Come out to the tabernacle meeting, and we're going to have a meeting. So the three came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam. So you have Aaron's name first, but we know that Miriam's name was first when it all started because she was the main one pushing this theory. And they both went forward, and he said, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, so you two are claiming to be prophets, Aaron and Miriam, and they were to some extent. It says, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. This is how God speaks to us. Sometimes you'll just have a vision, and he means you're not asleep, but suddenly you don't really see what's around you. It's like a daydream. It's like when you daydream, you might be in class daydreaming because the teacher's boring. You might be at church daydreaming because the preacher's boring. And suddenly in your mind, you're somewhere else. And you wake up and go, oh, wait, I'm back here. And he says, so sometimes I speak to you in a vision. I'll show you something that's going to happen. Or in a dream, you'll have a dream. And some of you have had dreams. And uh, uh, they'd later come true. He says, that's how I speak to people in a vision or a dream. He says, verse 7, he says, that's not so with my servant Moses. He's faithful in all my house. So I speak with him face to face. Now, he doesn't literally mean God comes down and talks to him, because in Exodus 33:20 he says, but he says, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. But he means I talk to, he hears my voice. He hears my voice. I talk to him. I don't speak to him in riddles. I don't use a vision in order to communicate something that you have to interpret later. I don't use a dream that you have to interpret later. I tell him plainly, hey, Moses, go down there and tell Pharaoh this and tell Pharaoh this. So if Moses is doing something, I'll tell him, I'll correct him if it's wrong. He says, even plainly, and not in dark sayings, which means riddles. I don't speak in parables. I just tell Moses, turn left, turn right. And he sees the form of the Lord. I come down in the cloud. He knows it's me. I'm not talking. It's not a mystery. He knows it's me talking to him. He says, so then why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Why are you criticizing him? What? I will talk to him if he's doing something wrong. I'll correct him. Why are you saying, how dare you do this? How dare you do this? As though you're making yourself God. And we do that in other people's lives. You should do this. You should do that. And God's like, I'll speak to this person when it's time. I'll explain to them what they need to know. I know where they are and what they're going through. Now, if God prompts you to tell someone something, then you do that. If God comes to you and says, you need to say so and so because I've been explaining to them and they haven't been listening. And normally when that happens, the people go, oh, wow, I'm glad you said that. That God has been saying that to me, but I didn't understand. I didn't know that was God or not. So thank you for confirming what God's already put on me. So it'll confirm something that God's already saying. But God won't circumvent the person first and go to you first. So if somebody shows up and tells you something and makes no sense, just ponder it in your heart. Maybe you missed it, but 7 times out of 10, you didn't miss it. That person's making that up. That's just their opinion. That they think God's told that to them. But you've never heard that before. God's never said that to you. And so you can't do anything with it. But every so often, God has been saying something to us. We've missed it. So if somebody says something to us, just ponder it to your heart. If God says, God told me you're supposed to move to Arkansas, just ponder it in your heart. Maybe you're supposed to, but you hadn't heard that. But maybe you realize, oh, I've been missing these signs. But most of the time, God talks to you first. Okay. So then why weren't you afraid to speak to Moses? Why are you presuming that you know more than him, or that I haven't already told him something? Who's making you God in his life? And it says that when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Now, this didn't happen to Aaron, it happened to Miriam, which is why we know that Miriam was the one leading it. Her name was first. The word spoke was in the feminine gender. Aaron was just standing there, and Miriam's the big sister saying, you know what I think? I think you should do this. I think you should do that. I think, And so Miriam becomes leprous, white as snow. Now, I think she was commenting because it wasn't that Moses cannot marry outside of his race. God tells them, here's how you do it if you marry outside, somebody who's not part of the children of Israel. He told them how to do it. I think it might have been the skin color, because Miriam, it's like, oh, this woman's dark, and you can't marry a dark woman. And people in the Bible are not perfect, so I'm not. Nobody's mad. David committed adultery, had a man killed, and Moses had somebody killed. Saul had people killed. Saul, who became Paul later. So there are thieves and all kind of people. The Bible's full of real people. So if Miriam is a little prejudiced, that's her thing. It's like, okay, all right, nobody's perfect. So I think it was the skin color. Like, she's too dark. Why are you marrying this black woman? Because you should only marry white women. You should only marry white. So God comes down and makes Miriam white as snow. Okay, you think you should be, because that's an interesting choice. There's so many things that God could have done. Now, again, leprosy is a sign of sin. Like, I'm displeased. But she became leprous as white as snow, as though she was saying, white's the only true color that God likes. Oh, really? I'll just make you really, really white then, if that's what your attitude is, because it's interesting. So then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. Like, oh man, she's instantly as white as snow. And that's what the Bible's making sure we understand. It wasn't just blotchy red. She's white. Like, oh, you think white's the only color? Okay, I'll make you really white. So Aaron said to Moses, oh my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us. They say this to Moses, as opposed to God. It was very interesting. Don't lay this on us. Don't let it lay on us. You can hand something to me, and also you can like put something that's so heavy that's laid on you. So yeah, we know we messed up, but we don't want to lay in this sin, in which we have done foolishly, in which we have sinned. Like, I admit we've sinned. Please do not let her be as one. Now this is interesting. One dead whose flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. Sometimes people would give birth, and the baby had decomposed inside the mother, and so it's born stillborn, and her flesh was starting to be eaten away, like if you gave birth to a stillborn child who had begun to decompose inside the mother before she was able to give birth to it. Don't let her be like that. That's terrible. Like, her flesh just be totally eaten away. So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, please heal her, O God, I pray. Now, one thing that God was always trying to teach Moses was intercession. Here's how you respond to people who are not doing what you want them to do. Intercede for them. If you see them being judged by sin, instead of going, oh, good, well, that's what you deserve, I'm teaching you to intercede, Moses. When I came down and said, those people down there, they have sinned, and they're building an idol, I'm telling you this so that you'll intercede. I'm trying to teach you intercession, because God cannot make us do anything. So I'm about to go down and destroy those people, Moses. What are you going to do about it? Oh, Lord, please don't destroy. And God says, okay, I'm not going to do it. And he's trying to teach Moses to have a different reaction, because what Moses wanted to do when people were sin was break tablets and scream at them and strike the rock. And he's like anger man. He killed an Egyptian because he was mad at how he treated somebody. And God saying, you can't always respond in anger, and I'm upset and I'm going to break things. And you can intercede. Said, Lord, help that person. And so he's trying to teach that to Moses. So he brings down the leprosy, and then Moses cries out, please heal her, oh God, I pray. And then the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not be ashamed 7 days? Like, let her be shut out of the account 7 days. If her father had but spit in her face, like, if she'd done a little thing, and in response to it, her father had spit in her, the law says for 7 days she's got to be outside the camp. So I can heal her right now, but there's a period of time that God forces people to repent so they can think about what they've done. You know how you give a child a timeout? I want you to think about what you've done. Now, sometimes all they're thinking about is plotting your death, but you want them to think about it and how you got there, what they should have done. Hopefully, if you have a child who's teachable, when he comes out of his timeout, he says, you know what, I'm sorry, I should not have done that. And I thought about how I got to the situation. Because at the time, I just think you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But I realized I was wrong. And so God says, here's a 7-day period so Miriam can really think about everything that has happened. So let her be shut out the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. Like, we're not going anywhere. But she's got to really think about, why was I so upset about Moses marrying this Ethiopian woman? Because God's trying to teach them, even though I've separated you and made you this peculiar people, this separate people, I'm doing it to make you an example to the other nations. Eventually, you were going to spread the word to the other nations, but the other nations need to see what happens to a people that have totally sold out to God. What is different about them? Not that they never mess up, but how they understand forgiveness, they understand holiness, they understand love, they understand all these things. I'm making you a separate people, and then you're going to go spread that to other people. But I don't want you to hate other people. Hey, Christians, I don't want you to hate other people. We're not supposed to hate sinners. We're supposed to be an example to them and then go out and minister to them. If we're like hating other people, then God's going to punish us. So, Miriam, you got to change your attitude and not think, no, she's not one of us. No, God loves everybody. Jesus was trying to explain that. God has died for the whole world. That's why I'm ministering to the Samaritans that you hate, because that was just typical of people. We don't like people that are different than us. They can have different politics than us. We hate them. They have different religion than us. They hate them. They can have different skin colors. We hate them. And God's saying, I don't want you to make other people your enemy. You won't be able to help them. I happen to love everybody, God is saying. But as soon as you look at that other group and you hate them, then I can't use you to reach out to them. So I will have to give you leprosy in some form until you think about your ways, and I'm going to force you to love everybody. So that's what he's doing for Miriam here. So they did not journey until Miriam's 7 days was up. And verse 16 says, and afterward the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran, and then the next set of adventure happens. But what we're supposed to learn today is not to separate ourselves from people. We separate ourselves unto God so God can do whatever he needs to do for us. But then we can't hate everybody else, because and that's what Jesus said. How can you say you hate your enemy and say you love God but you hate your enemy? How can you say you love God who you've never seen but you hate your brother who you see every day? It's like, that's not religion. That's not faith. So don't be like Miriam and, why are you hanging around with that person? Whatever the excuse is. They're a sinner, they're this, they're that. Whatever it is, God's like, no, don't let me have to give you leprosy to help you to check yourself, to see that you have to be open to all people. It was only the Canaanites and his descendants that you got to stay away from, because they're going to pull you into sin, and they're going to make you worship their gods, and going to turn you, because you're too weak to deal with them. Once you become strong enough, you can deal with whoever. But right now you're too weak, so you got to stay away from the Canaanites. I got to keep them away from you. But everybody else in the world, you are free to marry and to love and to minister to you, because God so loved the world that he gave his son. So we got to make sure we don't have an attitude where we are separating ourselves from people and hating them and coming up with some artificial reason to hate them. God doesn't like that. Okay, so I'm all done. Thank you so much for listening. On Wednesdays, I'm in the book of Luke. We're going through Luke. And then next week, I will continue in the book of Numbers. All right, thanks so much. All right, bye-bye.